Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, those listening in their cars, in their bedrooms, on walks, or maybe just trying to catch a breath in a world full of noise, I want to speak to your heart today. Some of you have been wounded deeply, not by strangers, by people you love, trusted, opened your life to. And after all the tears, all the confusion, all the pain, you looked up, hoping for some acknowledgement, some repentance, maybe even an apology. There's a moment after the chaos, after the shouting, after the betrayal, when everything grows quiet. And in that silence, you expect something, an apology maybe, a sign of remorse. At the very least, some recognition of the pain they caused. But instead, what you receive is nothing, just emptiness. They go on laughing, living, posting pictures, making plans, smiling at the world like you never mattered, like the storm they created was a story only you remember. And in that moment, something inside you breaks again, not because of what they did, but because of what they refused to acknowledge. This is what I call the cold silence after the storm. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of responsibility. It's the void left by someone who refuses to look back. And it can feel like emotional insanity. You're left replaying the wreckage, asking yourself, am I the only one who saw the damage? Am I the only one still bleeding? And you start to question reality, not just theirs, but your own. Because how can someone who claimed to love you act as though nothing happened? But that's the nature of a narcissist. They don't move through conflict like the rest of us. They don't seek resolution. They seek relief from accountability, from guilt, from vulnerability. And the easiest way to relieve themselves of those burdens is to act as though the wound they caused doesn't exist. They minimize, deflect, ignore. Because acknowledging what they did would mean admitting they were wrong, and to a narcissist, being wrong feels like death to the ego. So they pretend. They rewrite the narrative. They bury the truth beneath a smile and walk away from the wreckage they caused without ever looking back. It's not because they forgot. It's not because it wasn't real. It's because pretending nothing happened is their way of staying in control. If they can control the story, if they can convince others and even themselves that they did nothing wrong, then they don't have to face the one thing they fear most, the truth about themselves. And that's why they move on so quickly, so coldly, so convincingly, not because they're stronger than you, not because they've healed, but because acknowledging what they've done would mean feeling what they've tried so hard to avoid all their lives: guilt, shame, and the deep, gnawing fear that they are not who they pretend to be. And while you're left standing in the ruins, still trying to process what happened, they're already on to their next performance. But don't mistake that for strength. Don't envy their ability to move on without emotion. Because what looks like peace is really a mask. What looks like confidence is actually emptiness. And what feels like abandonment is really their fear of accountability dressed up as indifference. They act like nothing happened, not because they're free, but because they're running from the truth you've already had the courage to face. A heart that's closed off from conviction is a dangerous thing. You see, for most people, when we hurt someone, something inside us stirs. It may not come right away, but it comes. Guilt knocks at the door. Conscience rises up like a voice in the night saying, you were wrong. Go make it right. That's the mark of a heart still tender, still human, still capable of growth. But the narcissist, their heart doesn't respond that way. It's not that they don't know what they've done. It's that they've trained themselves not to care. Somewhere along the way, they built walls so thick that nothing, not truth, not love, not even the pain of others can get through. And those walls are built out of fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being flawed, fear of not being in control. So instead of opening themselves to conviction, they shut it out. They silence it. They drown it beneath layers of denial, pride, and projection. They'd rather destroy the relationship than admit they were wrong, because in their mind, being wrong equals being weak. And weakness is something they were taught to hate, maybe from childhood, maybe from trauma, maybe from a life where vulnerability was dangerous. So instead of taking responsibility, they shift it. They'll blame you for being too sensitive. They'll say you misunderstood. They'll accuse you of overreacting, or even of causing the very pain they inflicted. Why? Because if they can make you the problem, they never have to look in the mirror. That's how a narcissist preserves their false self, the image of perfection they built to protect the fragile identity underneath. They don't feel remorse like others do because they've numbed themselves to it. They've decided consciously or unconsciously that being right matters more than being real. And that lack of conviction, it isn't strength. It's spiritual sickness. It's what happens when a person refuses to confront the truth within themselves. When you cut off empathy, when you reject humility, when you silence your conscience long enough, eventually it goes quiet. Not because the truth has disappeared, but because you've stopped listening. And that's what makes it so hard to love a narcissist, because no matter how much you cry, how much you plead, how clearly you speak, you're trying to reach a heart that refuses to be touched by truth. But friend, that's not a reflection of you. Their refusal to feel does not mean your pain is not real. Their silence doesn't mean what happened wasn't wrong. It means you were dealing with someone who's lost touch with their own soul. And when someone is that far gone, so locked inside their own ego, they don't just hurt others, they do it without blinking. They rewrite the story in real time, bending memory, intention, and consequence until they no longer feel responsible for the pain they cause. To them, if they can just believe their version long enough, maybe, just maybe, they won't have to face the weight of their actions. It's like a stage play, one where they are always the hero or the victim, never the villain. If they betrayed you, they'll tell themselves you pushed them away. If they lied to you, they'll convince themselves you misunderstood. If they abandoned you, they'll craft a narrative where you were too needy or unstable or ungrateful. It doesn't matter what the facts were. What matters is preserving the mask, because behind that mask is not a strong person at peace with themselves. It's someone deeply afraid of being unmasked. Someone who cannot bear to sit with the discomfort of guilt or shame. So they create an alternate reality, one in which they remain innocent, blameless, and justified. And when they look at you, they don't see a person they've hurt, they see a threat to their illusion. Your pain confronts their denial, your questions challenge their carefully crafted script. So what do? They gaslight, they deflect, they accuse, not because they truly believe what they're saying, but because they need to believe it to survive emotionally. If they accepted the truth for even a moment, their entire identity might collapse. That's how fragile it really is. And isn't it strange how they can recall every small offense you committed, but seem to forget the giant wound they left in your chest? That's not forgetfulness, it's strategic amnesia. They remember what serves them and erase what doesn't. They walk through the world like an actor refusing to break character, even when the curtain has long fallen. Because to break character, to step into the truth, would mean stepping into accountability, and for the narcissist that feels like death. So they go on pretending nothing happened. They post pictures, laugh at parties, talk about moving forward, all while the wreckage of what they've done is still smoldering behind them. And people around them may believe it. They may even admire it. Look how well they're doing, they'll say. But they're not doing well, they're avoiding. They're not healed, they're hiding. And while they may seem untouchable on the surface, they are in truth chained to a lie they desperately need to keep believing. But the real tragedy is this: as long as they remain in that illusion, they will never know true intimacy, true growth, or true freedom. Because all of those things require honesty. They require self-examination. They require the courage to say, I was wrong. I hurt someone. I need to change. And that's a sentence the narcissist cannot bear to say. So they smile instead. They deny. They move on. But underneath it all, they are not free. They are imprisoned by the very image they use to protect themselves. One of the greatest temptations you'll face after being hurt by a narcissist is the urge to soften your boundaries. And it doesn't come from weakness, it comes from love, from hope. From that voice inside that still whispers, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe they'll change. Maybe if I'm more understanding this time, they'll finally see what they did. That voice tugs at your heart because you wanted the relationship to work. You believed in who they could be. And you keep thinking that if you just lower the drawbridge one more time, maybe they'll walk back in not as a destroyer, but as someone who finally gets it. But here's the truth that's hard to swallow. Narcissists count on that softness. They bank on it. They learn the rhythm of your heart, the places where you bend, the way you long for resolution. And they use it, not always maliciously, sometimes even subconsciously, but they use it just the same. Because for them, the relationship was never about mutuality, it was about control. So the moment you start to doubt your own right to stand tall, to say no more, to draw a firm line in the sand, you're already halfway back into their trap. It starts small. A text after weeks of silence. A casual message pretending like nothing happened. A compliment, a shared memory, a carefully timed apology that's just vague enough to give you hope, but never specific enough to show true change. And suddenly your boundaries feel negotiable. The clarity you once had begins to blur. You tell yourself you're being too harsh or too emotional or unforgiving. But what you're really doing is eroding the wall that kept your heart safe from further harm. And let me tell you, there's a reason you built that wall. There's a reason you found the courage to walk away, to stop explaining your pain to someone who refused to listen, to choose dignity over dysfunction. That was the moment you began healing. That was strength. But softening your boundaries out of guilt or loneliness, that doesn't make you noble. It makes you vulnerable to the same cycle of pain that broke you in the first place. Narcissists don't learn from your forgiveness. They learn from your limits. They don't change because you love them more. They change, if they ever do, because they can no longer get away with being who they've been. And until they feel the weight of your absence more than the convenience of your presence, they have no reason to reflect. They have no reason to grow. If every time they cause pain, they're met with your open arms instead of your closed door, what motivation do they have to look inward? You are not being cruel by saying no. You are not being unkind by stepping back. You are honoring your soul. You are valuing your peace. You are protecting the most sacred gift God gave you, your heart. Because when you stop softening your boundaries, you start strengthening your identity. And that, my friend, is when healing truly begins. There comes a moment in every journey of healing when the fog begins to lift. It doesn't happen all at once, no. It's gradual, like the slow breaking of dawn after a long cold night. But suddenly you begin to see. You see the manipulation for what it was, the emotional chaos, as something designed, not accidental. You stop making excuses for their behavior, and you begin to understand that the confusion was not a reflection of your lack of understanding, but of their lack of honesty. And in that moment, something sacred happens. You start to reclaim your clarity. You start to remember who you were before they distorted your reflection. There is immense strength in seeing clearly. Clarity is not just about understanding the narcissist, it's about understanding yourself in relation to them. When your eyes are open, you stop chasing explanations from someone who's not capable of giving you the truth. You stop needing them to validate your experience, because now you validate it for yourself. You realize that your pain was real, your reactions were justified, and your need for boundaries was not a character flaw, it was wisdom in disguise. This clarity doesn't come with fireworks or applause. Often it comes in the quiet. In the middle of a tearful night when you whisper, "I deserve better." In a morning where their silence no longer feels heavy. In a conversation with a friend when you hear yourself say, without bitterness, "They're not my responsibility anymore." That's clarity not fueled by revenge, but by peace. A peace that comes when you finally release the burden of fixing someone who refuses to admit they're broken. And let's be honest, seeing clearly can hurt. It hurts to let go of the hope that they might change. It hurts to accept that the apology you waited for may never come. It hurts to realize that the love you gave so freely was treated like something disposable. But even in that pain, there is a deeper power awakening within you. The power to no longer be ruled by someone else's inability to love. The power to stop orbiting around their approval. The power to stand, even if you're standing alone, in the truth of what really happened. That kind of clarity breaks chains. It breaks cycles. It breaks the patterns that kept you entangled in dysfunction disguised as love. It's not just about them anymore. It's about you, your healing, your growth, your future. Because when you see clearly, you no longer settle for crumbs of affection from someone who feeds their ego at your expense. You start demanding honesty. You start requiring mutual respect. You start choosing relationships that build you rather than break you. And most of all, you begin to see that the clarity you've gained wasn't just a gift, it was earned. Earned through heartbreak, through struggle, through nights you didn't think you'd survive. And now that you have it, you don't need to look back for closure. You don't need to chase justice from someone who has no sense of fairness. Because clarity is your closure. And in that, you've already won. The most profound response to the damage a narcissist leaves behind is not vengeance, it's growth. Not the kind of loud, flashy growth that demands the world's applause, but the quiet, steady internal transformation that speaks to your soul and says, I will not be defined by what broke me. Because the truth is, narcissists don't expect you to rise. They expect you to stay wounded, to stay questioning yourself, to remain small enough for their shadow to keep covering you. They don't anticipate your healing. They don't anticipate your evolution. And when it comes, it disrupts everything they tried to control. Growth, real growth, is their undoing. Not because it hurts them in a dramatic sense, but because it confronts the very thing they deny truth. When you begin to thrive outside of their manipulation, it proves that the narrative they built about you, how you were unstable, too emotional, too needy, was a lie. When you stop reacting to their provocations, when you no longer explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, when you take your energy back and pour it into your healing, that's when the power dynamic shifts. And they feel it. Even if they never say it, even if they never show it, they sense the silence of someone who has reclaimed their peace, and it rattles them. Because narcissists don't just feed off attention, they feed off the belief that they're still in your head, that they still have a hold on your emotions, that they can still pull the strings of your heart without even being present. But when you start living like they no longer matter, when your joy is no longer dependent on their remorse, when your self-worth is no longer measured by how they treated you, that's when they begin to place their grip entirely. And hear me on this, your healing doesn't have to look perfect. Some days you'll cry. Some days you'll feel the ache of what you hoped it could have been. But every step forward, no matter how small, chips away at the hold they once had. Every boundary you reinforce, every truth you tell yourself, every moment you choose not to look back, you are building a life where their voice no longer echoes in your mind. And that, my friend, is the victory, not revenge, not their regret, but your resilience. Your capacity to grow, even in the ruins, to become more kind, more discerning, more grounded, not despite the pain, but through it. Because your story doesn't end in the betrayal. That was just a turning point. The real story is what you do now, who you become, how you rise. Let them stay the same if they must. Let them live inside their echo chamber of denial and blame. But as for you, walk forward. Keep growing, keep healing, keep building a life so full, so rooted, so strong in truth that no light can shake it again. That is how you win. That is how you make peace with the past. That is how you reclaim your power. And so, my friend, if you remember nothing else from this moment, remember this: your pain was real, your voice matters, and your healing is holy. You may have been broken, confused, even cast aside by someone who seemed incapable of remorse, but that is not where your story ends. That's where it begins. Because God never wastes our suffering. He never lets our tears fall without purpose. What was meant to diminish you can become the very thing that defines your strength. The narcissist may act like nothing happened. They may walk away unbothered, untouched, unrepentant, but you walk away transformed. You walk away wiser, deeper, stronger than before. You're not called to be bitter, you're called to be better. You're not called to fix them, you're called to free yourself. And freedom doesn't come when they say sorry. Freedom comes when you decide to stop waiting for it. When you choose to stand in truth, even if it means standing alone. When you forgive, not to excuse them, but to unburden yourself from the weight of what they'll never carry. The narcissist might never look back. But you don't need to look back anymore, because what's ahead of you is far greater than anything you lost. Step forward with your head high, with your spirit anchored in truth, and your heart open to the life that can be not the one that broke you, but the one that's still waiting for you to claim it. That's where healing lies. That's where power begins. And that's where you will rise.